There's 4 players in the running for Gameweek 32 captaincy. There will be big swings, so we've got to make sure that we get it right. First up on the shortlist is Palmer on the back of his hat-trick. That's against the worst defence in the league, Sheffield United away from home. We do need to consider that the hat-trick was 2 penalties and a deflection. He only had 0.3 non-penalty XG in that match. That's something that needs to be considered. So if I am going to pick him for captaincy, that won't be the reason. Another option is Son against Forest at home. He's the only player on the shortlist this game week that's got the home advantage, and he's had a decent amount of rest since his last fixture. Salah's only got a few resting days ahead of his fixture against United away, but to be fair, he got pulled off early. He didn't even make it to the 60th minute, so he has got fresh legs. Haaland's got even fresher legs against Palace away. He didn't even feature in game week 31, so he's nearly had a week's worth of rest. We'll start off with the non-penalty stats per 90 minutes for this season. Salah's ahead on both the output and the expected output. While Son's overperformed his underlying stats by quite a margin this season, and Haaland slightly underperformed his, I'd say that Haaland's got the more promising numbers. We know that Son's an elite finisher, but to be fair, so is Haaland, and his overperformance in his career history proved that. Haaland's doing well to compete at the top when he gets 1 less point for every goal scored, and 1 less point for every XG accumulated in the calculations as well. As for Palmer, with him being a midfielder, he has this advantage, and his numbers are nowhere near as good as Haaland's. He's got the worst on the shortlist. To be fair, his numbers aren't bad, but in comparison to the other captaincy candidates, they don't compete. Luckily enough for him, he is a dedicated penalty taker for Chelsea, and he's scored 8 penalties so far this season. That's double more than any other player in the Premier League. We need to keep a level head about this. From this point onwards, Spurs, Liverpool and City have a similar, I'm not saying exactly the same, but a similar possibility of getting awarded a penalty as Chelsea do. With that information, Son, Salah and Haaland are all on penalty duties for their respective clubs. And as a disclaimer, I'm not knocking Palmer for captaincy, but I'm saying if you are going to captain him, don't put too much emphasis on his output. You need to consider the penalties as well. It does benefit him that he is the main man on direct free kicks for Chelsea. Salah and Haaland take them occasionally, and Son doesn't take any, and none of these players take indirect free kicks or corners. Haaland's got the highest anytime goal scorer odds this game week, but he has also got the lowest anytime assister odds, and when you combine them together, he's got the highest anytime return odds by a small margin, and I do like the fact that his odds are weighted heavily on goals. There's not much to split the midfielders on any of the odds. I'd say that Salah's got the slightly better odds because these are weighted more towards goals and he's got the highest chance of success. If we are going to consider Haaland's odds being weighted heavily towards goals, we've got to consider the fact that Salah gets an extra point for every goal scored in comparison to Haaland, so I'd say that he's got the best weighted odds. The Egyptians also got the highest points projection on FPL Review with 7.1. However, on Fantasy Football Fix, Son takes the lead with 6.1. Whilst both data models disagree with the top 2, Haaland cements himself in 3rd place on both of them, and Palmer in 4th place on both of them as well. If we're nitpicking, Salah's got the highest average because he's only 0.2 behind on Fix, and he's 0.3 ahead on Review. Whilst Palmer individually hasn't competed up until this point, he has got the easiest fixture on the shortlist because he does face the worst defence in the whole league. For the other 3 opponents, Forest and Palace have identical defensive records, and they have conceded more goals per 90 minutes than United, but the Devils have been expected to concede more goals per match, and whilst they've been conceding less goals than that, it's not sustainable, and I'd say that their defence has been worse this season because the expected numbers are better at projecting the future numbers than the actual numbers themselves. Before we conclude, we're going to carry out a quick risk assessment. First of all, Palmer's at a disadvantage in comparison to the other 3 players because he's not even had 3 full days worth of rest, but he featured for 90 minutes. Son and Haaland have had a decent amount of recovery, and while Salah gets the same amount of rest days as Palmer, he did only feature for 59 minutes, so his legs won't be tired. It is worth mentioning that Haaland didn't feature at all in City's last match, and this is the second to last match where he did feature for 90 minutes, and of course we know it's Haaland, he's not been dropped, it's just that he's been rested ahead of the congested schedule. We can see that his expected minutes are pretty safe, the same applies to Son and Salah as well. Palmer's are a little bit lower because of what we mentioned earlier, but they're not too risky. Now it's time to conclude. There's not much to split the 4 players on the shortlist this game week. I would happily captain any of them, but I'm not going to sit on the fence. In my opinion, Palmer's not a bad captaincy option this game week, but I think he's being overrated, and he takes last place for me. In 3rd place is Haaland because Son's got the home advantage, which puts him in 2nd place, and my favourite option this game week is Salah for the reasons that I've included on the screen. Make sure you subscribe if you found this video informative so you don't miss any future captain picks.